next presentation here is by Dr. Alexander Averbakh. He holds a PhD in chemical process technology and equipment, as well as an MSc in optics and spectroscopy. Dr. Averbach's expertise spans across various scientific research fields with notable contributions in designing laser Doppler anemometers for investigating turbulent flows, studying turbulent flows and mixing in static mixers, and exploring high concentrated suspension flows using laser Doppler anemometers. His work also extends to the design of systems for measuring light scattering characteristics of high concentrated suspensions and water management in power plants. Additionally, Dr. Averbakh has made significant contributions to the improvement of equipment for various chemical processes, including mixing and thermo and mass transfer. With over 20 publications to his name, Dr. Averbach's research has garnered widespread recognition and admiration in the scientific community. His dedication to advancing our understanding of complex phenomena within chemical engineering and related disciplines is truly commendable. So, without further ado, please join me in welcoming Dr. Alexander Averbach's presentation titled "Is Information Everything?" Please go ahead, Mr. Averbakh.
Здравствуйте. Я рад приветствовать всех. I'm happy to greet everyone. Присутствующих на нашей конференции. Everyone present at our conference. My presentation will be dedicated to the concept of information, as we announced. Information plays a very important role in the modern world. Although the same way as it happens with concepts that are fundamental to our nature, there is no commonly accepted definition of this concept. I took this quote from Norbert Wiener, one of the founders of cybernetics. This quote: "It's impossible to prove that nature is governed by laws, but without the belief that nature is governed by laws, there can be no science." So yes. So the same Wiener said his phrase that emphasizes this: information from informatio in Latin, meaning data, messages, or notification, or information. In our time, until the 30s of the 20th century, the concept of information was used in its standard meaning of information, data messages, and notification. But in the 60s, Claude Shannon suggested a quantitative measurement of information, quantitative assessment of information, and after several years, the French physicist Brillouin linked information with the measure of order in the system. He introduced the concept of negentropy as opposed to entropy, a measure of disorder, as we know. So negentropy characterizes a measure of order. And he suggested to measure this opposite concept in using the same scale as entropy. And these new ideas were the beginning of informational boom. There were new theories connected to this information theory of management of information and so on. But in general, these theories were more about the form of expressing information. The science that studies this is called semantics. But the essence of information is the meaning that's passed on, so the interpretation of these signs that are in the message. It's clear that this meaning can be conveyed with different signs, and the important thing is to know the code that connects the signs and the meaning that they carry. This semiotics, the study of semiotics studies this link on the interaction of natural and formal languages. As we find out, information was not always used in our modern time. For example, in the Divine Comedy of Dante at the beginning of the 14th century, he used the Latin root informa to define the primary, denote the original essence from which creation is formed. Modern science also comes to similar conclusions. The 1960s saw the emergence of the hypothesis that our universe is a computer simulation. Soon, different versions of this theory began to appear. So the renowned physicist John Wheeler proposed the it from bit theory, meaning everything is in the bit. According to this theory, all physical objects are fundamentally immaterial. They have an information theoretical basis. So the ideas of the idea that there is an informational basis, foundation, they also came from the ancient Greeks. Aristotle, to the five, added to the five forces of nature, air, water, fire, and earth, added added the idea of ether, and Plato thought that everything comes from ether. Closer to our times, René Descartes in the 17th century brought back the concept of ether. And then what is ether? Is some kind of a place where, an environment where light propagates or different objects connect together. It doesn't have material characteristics, so to speak. It cannot be constricted. It doesn't have a weight, and so on. And the peak, so to speak, of the paradigm connected to ether were during the days of James Maxwell. He used the concept of ether in which electromagnetic fields, electromagnetic waves propagate. Then this concept began to disappear from the scientific lexicon, and because there were famous Michelson and Morley experiments, the speed of propagation of electromagnetic waves is not affected, and then Einstein showed that these waves can spread in a vacuum and do not need any additional environment. But scientists always had this thought that something had to be the reason for the emergence of our universe, and many seemingly from nothing. And other scientists added their concepts. One of the creators of quantum mechanics, Paul Dirac, added the concept of physical vacuum, such an environment. Actually, it wasn't vacuum. It was something filled up with virtual particles. On average, they could not be detected, but this environment could interact with the material universe and influence it. Einstein's students, one of the great physicists of our times, David Bohm, built his alternative quantum mechanics, where the foundation of everything was the quantum potential, so-called quantum potential. Bohm's version is lacking many disadvantages of the Copenhagen approach. We can say the hypothesis of ether and similar ideas are meant to explain the paradox of the universe's emergence from nothing. And many feel that they have the intuitive feeling that nothing can come from nothing. Modern science comes to the theoretical explanation that everything really appeared from some informational environment. One of the forefront theories is called exactly this: the theory of informational appearance, informational birth of the universe. According to this, according to the current perception of our universe, the only thing that existed is informational scale of field. It was a quantum reality that contained neither matter nor energy nor time and space. But from this informational reality, the perceptible world appeared. The second theory, that everything appeared from a non-material sphere, is formed by topological structures of the vacuum. So it's not emptiness, rather something that exists in potential. It is not. It doesn't exist. And many today reach the conclusion that for information, the law of preservation also exists, similar to physical laws. For example, like we see in mass and energy. But the laws of conservation are a result of conservation in information. I would like to shift to a different area where information is also important. We are speaking of the phenomenon of consciousness. And here we also use the analogy, the computer analogy. The computer is made up of physical parts and the program that the programmer enters and that controls the activity of the computer. So the analogy is similar to the physical object that does this in us is the brain, the most complex object we can study, and the consciousness has a purely informational nature. But here there are many eternal questions that we had throughout our existence of our civilization. Who is the programmer that created all this? Does he have a goal? And maybe who created this programmer and so on. But if we get back to the consciousness, there are scientists that assert that information is the fundamental quality of universe. Consciousness is only expressed in a clear way in a human, but those that deal with animals, they also see that dogs have this, for example, and they have proof. The direction called panpsychism is that we are parts of the general whole, but because there are objects that make up this whole, then this consciousness needs to exist in the most elementary particles. The smallest particles also have some small forms of consciousness, and the followers of panpsychism are growing. If we look at nature, the levels of evolution of matter, if we look at the nature around us, the inanimate, the objects that appeared have much bigger informational saturations, the objects of living nature, such as vegetative, animal, and human. And the levels of matter with bigger organization, higher levels of organization, are perceived, their parts are more interconnected, more strongly linked between them. The informational saturation is much higher, and the form of their organization correspond to higher manifestations of consciousness, and in humans it reaches the maximum. So here there is a question: is it possible for higher levels of organization of matter to appear from lower levels of matter through natural evolution? As materialists think that some processes occurred in inanimate nature, that somehow life appeared, and actually none of these hypotheses were proven, actually were disproven, and these ideas actually contradict the law of preservation of information. As we know, according to the second law of thermodynamics, an isolated system that doesn't exchange information with the external environment, external world, it degrades, and the amount of information goes down. If we have a transition to systems that have less system, from a system that has less information to a system that has more information, then where does this information come from? Surely there needs to be a source of this information outside of this system, and it needs to be open. And here we seeming surface level attempt to touch these questions. This makes us assume the following, that the source of information is this level that has more information has to precede the source that was responsible for the creation of matter of a lower level. If we assume that there is some information space, no matter what we call it, then it mirrors matter. If in the matter we see a transition from more primitive objects to more complex ones, in the informational space, this needs to be the opposite. There, more highly organized structures have to form earlier, then have to precede the less organized ones. The evolution goes seemingly from up downward. There are also archaeological findings. There are discoveries that show that there were individuals of animals, doesn't matter, in the living nature, that had organs that they didn't actually need. And these organs, they became necessary only to the following generations. That nature knows the future. Here I would like to go to the following. There is a very ancient wisdom called Kabbalah, and there all these questions are described in the fullest sequence. It talks about what this informational environment is about, the mechanism of this formation. And we can also find many questions where modern science has stopped and cannot understand what is going on. And at the end, I'd like to say that we today are witnessing clear signs of a crisis. The word crisis has a different meaning. It means, it also signifies birth. And it's entirely possible that this crisis is connected to the fact that we're on the verge of some transition, possibly to higher forms of consciousness. And this transition will be much more significant than the transition from inanimate nature to living. And this has to do with information that we use to get all of our progress. Thank you for your attention.
Thank you very much, dear Dr. Averbakh, for this insightful presentation. So, yes, let's see. We are a little bit over time, but still, this is the way it is when we have interesting topics. So let's see if we have questions here in our Zoom room. If you want to raise a question, please raise your hand. And then we could hear you live. It doesn't look like it. So maybe we have a question. Do we have a written question, Yasmin?
Yes, there are two questions. I don't know if you have time, but the first one from the YouTube channel, English channel, from Lunea. In light of Dr. Averbach's presentation, what about the ethical implications of viewing information as a primal principle of the universe? How might this perspective influence our approach to technology and societal structures?
Спасибо. Ну, в общем-то, этические проблемы, конечно, связаны с
Ability
развитием
to use
науки,
science in an anti-humanitarian ways. We see that our whole history of development of nature talks about that it goes from more primitive, isolated objects to more perfected and united ones. And it seems to me that humanity is not an exception, and our path, if we take into consideration the good path, is unity of humanity into one superorganism that will have this super consciousness, thanks to which we will be able to directly enter and feel this informational field that created everything.
Wonderful. Thank you so much. That's all the time we have here. So thank you again for this wonderful presentation. And from here, we take it seamlessly to transition to our next segment.